So, I had originally a reading from Richard Gere, of all people, and then I saw something on Facebook that was more to the theme of today's talk, which is on kindness. So, I don't know who wrote it because it just appeared and it was shared many times, but what is my purpose in life? I asked the void. What if I told you that you fulfilled it when you took an extra hour to talk to that kid about his life, said the voice. Or when you paid for that young couple in the restaurant. Or when you saved that dog in traffic. Or when you tied your father's shoes for him. Your problem is that you equate your purpose with goal-based achievements. The universe isn't interested in your achievements, just your heart. When you choose to act out of kindness, compassion, and love, you are already aligned with your true purpose. So, nice words to live by. So, thank you all for coming on post-Thanksgiving. Hopefully everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving and shared it with people they care for. So, speaking of Thanksgiving, the month of service is about gratitude, and part of that is a subset that I'm going to talk about. So we've just had Thanksgiving, and there's a lot of giving and a lot of misgivings associated with Thanksgiving now, with the ill treatment of the First Nation by the European settlers, and it continued and continues to this very day. So there's that cloud that hangs over Thanksgiving. But one tradition that I usually follow, and I think it's followed in many homes, is going around the table or going around amongst the people gathered and them reciting what they're grateful for. And they could be grateful for, of course, the love and friendship of their families and friends and loved ones and spouses and girlfriends and boyfriends and that, or the love of their pets. Or it could be maybe an object to be thankful that you have shelter over your head, or for your health, or that you have a job that you enjoy doing, or that you have money in your bank, that type of thing. But we often forget there's a part of that thankfulness that is just about the kindness that has been bestowed on us by friends and strangers. And so that's what I'm going to talk about, is kindness. Now in the program it says loving kindness, and so I don't really distinguish between an act of kindness and loving kindness, because if the act is given without an agenda, without a reciprocity involved, then it's truly an act of loving kindness. So what is loving kindness? What is acts of kindness? Well, they can be grandiose, right? They could be someone giving you a car because you don't have one, which I think just happened. The Rock just gave somebody a vehicle, a veteran. It could be giving you a home because you have no home. It can be preparing a lavish meal for you, or giving you a career, giving you an opportunity into a career, something like that. But what about the small acts of kindness that could be equally heart-wrenching and heartfelt? They could be seemingly insignificant at the moment. They could be something like offering a person a lift to work because they don't have a car, or giving someone a couch to sleep on because they have nowhere to sleep that night, or maybe giving someone a peanut and butter jelly sandwich because they're hungry, or giving them a job, maybe even a menial job, but a job that's honest and will put money in their pocket, or just giving them a few dollars to get through the day. So these small acts of kindness get us to where we are today. And I know I've had many acts of kindness bestowed onto me, and I'm sure if you think about your lives, you'll remember when someone has been kind to you and done something for you that has pushed you forward at a time when you were feeling down or low. So what I'm going to do today, and it's going to be a fun thing, I hope, for you all, is I've chosen several famous people who had things, acts of kindness done for them before they became famous. And before I get into that, I'm going to tell you a personal story on acts of kindness. Many years ago, I was visiting with my eldest niece, and she told me something that kind of floored me because I had no idea. She told me that the fondest memory she has in childhood, now she's 50, so she's not a child anymore. She has children that have children. But she told me her fondest memory was of me coming to visit her. And, you know, I was not Uncle of the Year. I did not feel like I had done anything spectacular for her in her childhood. I worked in the oil field, and often I was sent to Oklahoma. And I had a company truck, and I would go visit my brother and his wife, and often eat meals there, and play with his 2 children at the time. And I would take them to the park. I would take them on little adventures, mostly out of my own boredom, rather than being a great uncle, but I would take them for ice cream and sodas, or take them to a park, and we'd climb a fire station. So, you know, some dangerous things, some things that probably their parents would not have enjoyed knowing I did with them. But she told me she was abused as a child, which I had no idea. Her mother would beat them, and often I would come visit, and they'd have a broken arm or a leg, and I just thought it was what children do. They fall down, they break things. No clues, they weren't bruised. Anyway, so my acts of kindness to her was a revelation to me. I had no idea the small things that I had done, which I would have done probably with any child, meant so much to her. That's her childhood, is those memories. So I'm going to tell you 4 stories, and I'm going to use first person singular to do their bios. And at the end, you'll have an opportunity to guess who these famous people are. Now, some of them are rather old and no longer with us, and you may not know them, and some are pretty obviously famous. So I will find the first person here. Okay, so I was born on February 24th, 1955, to Abdul Fattah Jandali and Joanne Shible, and was adopted by Paul and Clara. When I was placed with Paul and Clara, neither of them had a college education, and my mother refused to sign the adoption papers until she knew that I would get a college education. She held that over them until they agreed that they would put aside money and make sure I had a college education. And only then did she consent to allow me to be adopted by Paul and Clara. My first cousin maintains that my actual birth name is Abdul Latif Jandali. So in 1959, my family moved to Montaloma neighborhood in Mountain View, California. It was during this time that my dad, Paul, built a workshop in the garage because he wanted to bond with me as a son, and so we would pass his love of mechanics on to me. Now, I wasn't into cars, but I did enjoy spending time with my adopted father. And I admired his craftsmanship because he knew how to build anything. If we needed a cabinet, he would build it. And when we built our fence, he would make sure that he gave me a hammer so I could work with him. So I was eager to hang out with my dad, and his kindness is always remembered. By the time I was 10 years old, I was deeply involved in electronics and befriended many of the engineers that lived in the neighborhood. But I had difficulty making friends in school. I was a bit of a nerd, and later, as I got older, I had long hair and was in many social activist groups, and so I was hard to pinpoint exactly who and what I was, and so I was a loner. And I tended to resist authority figures and got in trouble in school and was suspended many times. And part of that was because my mother taught me to read at a very young age, and I got bored in school. I was maybe a little too smart for my britches and just got in trouble. But I had this teacher, Imogene Teddy Hill, and she turned me around in school. She taught an advanced class in the 4th grade, and it took her about a month to connect with me, to figure out what was going on with me. But what she did was she bribed me into learning. She would say, I really want you to finish this workbook, and I'll give you $5 if you finish it. And that kindled my passion for learning. And I think I learned more in that 1 year thanks to that teacher and her kindness towards me and giving me extra time than I learned in any other school year. When I was 13, 1968, I got a job with Bill Hewitt of Hewitt and Packard. What I did was I did a cold call. I called the guy and said I needed parts for an electronics project around that time, and he was so impressed with me over the phone that he gave me a job with his company. And so what I was up to, I had a buddy, the only friend I had at the time, who I really appreciated. He had designed a low-cost digital blue box, and this would generate enough tones to manipulate the telephone network, allowing you to get free long-distance calls. So it was a scam, but hey, you know. So I decided to sell them and split the profits, of course, with my buddy. And this clandestine sale of illegal blue boxes went well and perhaps planted the seed in my mind that electronics could both be fun and profitable. In fact, I recall in an interview saying that if it wasn't for my buddy and I figuring out how to build these blue boxes and sell them, I probably wouldn't have started the company I did. I realized I could take on big corporations and win. So, to recap, the kindnesses of his adopted parents, the kindnesses of his teacher, and the kindnesses of his friend helped propel him. Any idea who this man might be? Yes? Yes. And Jan, if you'll throw his picture on, I will make it official. Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is person number 1 who had acts of kindness. So we'll move on to the second person, but before I do, I wanted to actually share something else that was really a kick, I guess. When I went to find people who were famous, who had acts of kindness bestowed on them, no matter how I worded it in my Google search, I got famous people that helped not so famous or so unfortunate people. I could not find anyone who was helped by acts of kindness, no matter how I worded it. I just rearranged the words and try a different search, and I was getting frustrated. And then it dawned on me. Who has not had an act of kindness bestowed on them? Everyone. So that's why I had such a hard time. So I just found 4 people who had nothing in common and just read their stories and realized, so this one is for me gold personally. So He was born in 1901 in August in New Orleans. And he has a couple of nicknames that would immediately tell you who he is, so I'm not going to tell you his nicknames at all. But his parents were Mary Albert and William. And he was raised by his grandma until the age of 5, when he was returned to his mother. And he spent his youth in poverty in a rough neighborhood known as the Battlefield. At 6, he attended the Fisk School for Boys, a school that accepted black children in a racially segregated city of New Orleans. And now here's where his story takes a turn. At the age of 7, he was given to the Kamakovsky family. The Kamakovskys were Lithuanian Jews. And he lived in their home, and he worked for them. And Mrs. Kamovsky used to sing him lullabies at night before bed in Yiddish and in Russian. And the Karnofskys took him in and treated him like family. Knowing he lived without a father, they fed and nurtured him as if Mr. Karnofsky was his father. And he discovered that this family also was subject to discrimination by other white folks who felt that they were better than these Jews. I was only 7, he said, but I could easily see that the ungodly treatment that these white folks were handing these poor Jewish family whom I worked for. He wrote about what he learned from them, how to live real life with determination. My first musical performance may have been at the side of the Kamovsky's junk wagon. They sold junk. To distinguish them from other hawkers, I would play on a tin horn to attract customers. Morris Karnofsky gave me my first cornet from a pawn shop. When I left the Karnofskys, I was fluent in Yiddish, and I wore a Star of David until the end of my life in memory of this family who had helped raise me. When I was 11, I dropped out of school. My mother had moved into a one-room house with myself, my sister Lucy, and her common-law husband. I joined a quartet of boys who sang in the streets for money. I also got into trouble. But I remember cornetist Punk Johnson said that he taught me to play by ear at a club, a honky-tonk called Dago Tony's. He said, every time I'd close my eyes and blow my trumpet, I'd think right into the heart of New Orleans. It'd given me something to live for, this trumpet, and knowing how to play it. So I played in brass bands and riverboats in New Orleans. In 1918, I traveled with Fate Marable down the Mississippi River. And Mr. Marable, who was very proud of his musical knowledge, he insisted that I and the other members of the band learn to read sight music. And so being able to have this experience doing learning arrangements was like going to university. I couldn't thank him enough. So again, to recap, we have his musical education given by many different people who imparted this, not because they had an agenda, but because they really wanted him to succeed, and of course the Karnofskys, who loved him as a child. Any idea who this may be? Yes, sir.
Sammy Davis Jr., baby.
Nope. Yes, Louis Armstrong. Picture, please. That's okay. There's Louis Satchmo. All right. Our next one goes back a ways. He was born Giacomo Antonio Domenico Michele Secondo Maria in Lucca, Italy, in 1858. So some of you might remember him. His family was well established in the musical dynasty there. His dad was a maestro there. But his father, Michele, died in 1864, and I was only 6 years old, so obviously I wasn't going to be leading any bands at 6 years old. But one of my uncles, Fortunato Maggi, took me on and supervised my musical endeavors. Early in my career, though, I had very difficult time earning money to pay for my meals. Fortunately, there was a restaurant in Milan where I lived called Aida, of all things, and the restaurateur gave me and my family free meals. Not for 1 year, but for 14 years while I struggled musically to establish myself in the musical industry. And on February 1st, 1893, my Manon Lecote was done in the Teatro Regio in Turin, Italy, where it was an immediate, enormous success. Money and fame poured into me, and so what did I do? I went to that restaurant, the Aida, and I ordered the most expensive, lavish meal he had and paid him back every dime for every meal my family and I lived on, thanks to him and his kindness. Who is this maestro? I stumped the band, it seems. We have a winner here. Puccini, Giacomo Antonio Domenico Michele Segundo Maria Puccini. There he is in his dapperness. I think we have time for one more person, and the kindnesses that were bestowed on her. So she was born in 1929, 1954, so a little more contemporary, the fact that she's still alive. And her first name was spelled differently than it's pronounced now, or spoken now. And people confused her first name. It's a biblical name, and they got it so confused that she just went with whatever they called her. So that's your first hint. Her mother is Vernita Lee, and she was a housemaid. And her dad is named Vernon, and he was a coal miner, but then he turned barber, and then he turned city councilman. So he had an interesting life. When I was born, my mother traveled north for work, and I spent the first 6 years of my life in rural poverty with my maternal grandmother, Hattie Mae. My grandmother was very poor, and the dresses I wore were made of potato sacks. And although she taught me to read at the age of 3 and encouraged me to speak to people and be not a shy little girl, and that really helped me, she also beat me. So I had an abusive early age. And my life started turning even worse than that, because I was molested by my cousin, my uncle, and a family friend when I was 9 years old onward. At the age of 13, I could take no more, and I ran away from home. And I became pregnant at 14 in Chicago. Unfortunately, my baby died shortly after I gave birth to it. It was in Chicago that I ran into Aretha Franklin, of all people, who was going to a show and pulled up in a limousine, and I went over to her and spoke enough that she gave me $100. I told her how poor I was and how needing I was of money, and so I convinced her to give me $100. I'm not proud of that because I kind of scammed her out of that. But at 14, I went to live with my dad in Tennessee. And here's where my life started to take focus. He got me focused on schooling, and because of that, I was subsequently given a scholarship. And my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Benton, was the first person that really, really believed in me and said I was just the smartest little girl she'd ever met. And that spurred me on to other things, to greatness. My grandma, back to her, would often have me do interviews with my corncob doll. So I started getting very comfortable talking to people, even imaginary people. And then I had gotten my first job on TV and was told I shouldn't do TV. I had a terrible presence, and I was worthless, and they fired me. And I was down on my luck when a radio show in Chicago gave me a chance. It was the lowest rated radio show in Chicago at the time. I said, why not let her do it? And I quickly made that the #1 radio show in Chicago. And then Roger Ebert gave me this great advice. He said, sign with King World and make sure you have a show that's got your name on it. And that was great advice. Oh, and did I mention that one of my greatest mentors that started mentoring me when I was 20 was Maya Angelou. And that friendship has continued to this day. So I've had some kindnesses in my life, although I like to think that my talent finally came through. But if it wasn't for the kindness of all those people, where would I be? Who am I? You got it. So her actual name, going back to that, is Orpah, O-R-P-A-H. And nobody ever got that right, so she just went with Oprah. So sometimes you got to go with what happens there, yes. So let's see. So I think that takes us through the sermon. I thank you, and we're into the offering.